It is the year 0079 of the Universal Century. A half-century has passed since Earth began moving its burgeoning population into gigantic orbiting space colonies. A new home for mankind, where people are born and raised and die. 9 months ago, the cluster of colonies furthest from the Earth, called Side 3, proclaimed itself the Principality of Zeon and launched a war of independence against the Earth Federation. Initial fighting lasted over 1 month and saw both sides lose half their respective populations. People were horrified by the indescribable atrocities that had been committed in the name of independence. 8 months had passed since the rebellion began. They were at a stalemate. The 1-Year War is the single most important story in the entirety of the Gundam franchise. Today, we begin going through the entire thing. We're going to explain exactly how this whole thing began and how it ended. Before we get started on this next installment of the 1-Year War Explained, I do want to thank everyone for watching the last one. Today, we're going to be going even more in depth in regards to Gundam and its lore, because I really didn't feel like I properly explained a few things in regards to the universe last time out. Not to mention, I alluded to the beginning of Operation V and actually skipped a few months between January up to the start of Mobile Suit Gundam as a series. So what we're going to be going over is what the Universal Century is and what I mean when I talk about sides in regards to the colonies, things of that nature. So today, we're going to go through the Gundam timeline of the Universal Century up until the end of the first third of the animated series, and talk about a bunch of really cool lore stuff. So, let's go ahead and get started on part 2, shall we? Part 2, Journey to Jaburo. So, last we left our story...
Sign here on the dotted line, Patriots, and I'll give you your discount cards.
Just out of curiosity, we could use the cards to buy gum, then immediately quit the army, right?
You know, playing you off for chumps.
Correct. There's no obligation. Unless, of course, war were declared.
What's that?
War were declared.
Zeon had killed billions of people and were dominating the war with the Earth's sphere, all thanks to the development of the mobile suit. However, Earth had began development of their own mobile suits with Project V, headed up by Tem Ray. Now, the bulk of what we discussed in regards to the war really happened just in the month of January of Universal Century 0079. Now, what exactly is the Universal Century? To put it simply, it's a new enumeration of years in the normal calendar that we're all used to, following BC, before Christ, and then AD, Anno Domini, meaning Year of Our Lord in Latin. I know there's some weird other way that the enumerations are done by whiny atheists, but this is my response to that.
What are you doing? No!
In the first year of the Universal Century, humans started living in space, which is why a new enumeration was created. Each of the clusters of colonies is at a Lagrange point around the Earth. On this handy map that you're seeing in front of you, thanks to Shirt Dude, we can see that Side 1 and Side 4 are close to one another, as are Side 2 and Side 6. That's part of the reason why Zeon targeted them, given their proximity to Side 3, which, as you can see, is on the far side of the moon, and why Side 6 declared neutrality as fast as they did, since they're so close to the conflict. Side 5 is where the Battle of Loom took place. With that, I think we're all caught up on that part of the lore, as we should understand it from the first episode. Now, between all of the action that happened in January up until September, the war was largely moving to Earth itself, as Zeon invaded during February of UC 0079. This was put under the command of Commander Garma Zabi, who is the youngest member of the Zabi family. His initial invasion was very successful, with the Earth invasion forces capturing most of Europe, Asia, Africa, and North America. They performed 2 more drop operations after an initial one, and by March they had managed to capture the Federation's California base, which ended up becoming the new stronghold of the Earth Attack Force. One of the teams that was instrumental in the capture of the California base was headed up by Lieutenant Commander Garrett Schmitzer, and was dubbed the Midnight Fenrir Corps. This team would be involved in quite a few operations throughout North America, but this particular battle was their big coming out party. Quick side note, as we go on, I will be bringing up other small one-year war teams as the story goes on, just to kind of give you an idea of where they were when big events were happening. So if you're curious if I'm going to bring up side stories, hopefully this answers the question because it's a resounding yes. Anywho, during the third landing operation, Zeon moves up the Oceania region as well. It's in April of 0079 that the Federation begun its development of Operation V, like I mentioned in the last video. Now in May, Federation forces had started to steal Zaku 2s in order to fight back on Zeon's terms. This is where we see a couple of instances happen where Zeon forces would basically clash with their own mobile suits. It was at this time that the 603rd Technical Evaluation Unit, our friends over at the Jotunheim, were testing a mobile tank unit called a Hidolfer in an operation to counter such a mobile suit theft. Though the mobile tank managed to successfully repel Federation forces, the Hidolfer project in and of itself was scrapped, which surprises no one because Girinzabi was kind of a dumbass to build the thing in the first place. The Noisy Fairy team also encounters a similar group of Federation, pilots at this time who had stolen Zaku's. Now in June, Zeon completed its defensive line in space by establishing a few specific bases at Lagrange Point 5. Now what's notable about this is that this was also the time that Zeon started scientific research into the concept of new types. Now, I mentioned new types with the last episode of the series, and now we're going to go a little bit more in depth into... Oh shit. I have to explain what new types are, don't I? This is going to suck. Okay, look, new types are hard to explain because, to be honest, what new types are and what they can do has never properly been defined that clearly within the Gundam franchise. What I'm going to stick with is an explanation that I've come up with that is based around what we see specifically during the 1 Year War. And then as time goes on and I go on talking about other Universal Century series, we'll talk about how new types and the technology around them manifests when we get to that point. If there's a simple way of describing this, it's that new types have a sort of sixth sense about them, almost as if they're empaths. They can sense emotional shifts and changes, even over long distances. They can also sense when other new types are near as well. This feeds into Zeon Daikun's theory that as humanity went into space, the humans would start to evolve in a way that would facilitate better communication. Well, of course, if you can literally read someone's emotions, and even in some cases project thoughts to them, you're going to be able to communicate on a much deeper level much faster. However, since we've got a military involved with the research, that genocidal fuck Girinzabi, of course, is going to go, how can we use this to kill people? Thus, there was development on a couple of key projects. The first was the Saikamu system, which would allow new types to manipulate weaponry that uses their unique brainwaves. The other was the exam system, which was a system which would be developed with the hopes of allowing old types to battle on equal footing with new types, given that a new type's abilities in combat would theoretically be superior. In July, the mobile suit that would change the tone of the war was finally completed by this Federation at Side 7's research base. After the completion of the RX-77 gun cannon, the RX-78-1 was completed and given the name of Gundam. Now, the prototype of the Gundam, which we'll call Unit 1, was initially rolled out in a black, white, and red color scheme and wasn't as well armored as its successor. After they tweaked things a bit and improved the armoring and things along those lines, the most famous unit of this line, the RX-78-2, was completed. It was given a red, white, blue, and yellow color palette instead, and then Unit 1, which at this point was almost indistinguishable from Unit 2 because of the armor additions, was recolored as well, to the point where the units were basically identical to one another. The Gundam used armor called Luna Titanium, which is a lightweight alloy that also is considerably more durable than the alloys that were used in Zaku 2s. Like the gun cannon, this mobile suit was also able to use beam weaponry. However, the main difference between the gun cannon and the Gundam was the fact that the Gundam was meant for close to medium range combat, meaning that this thing was meant to be incredibly nimble and hard hitting, This thing could move at a land speed of 165 kilometers per hour. So imagine essentially a 60-foot giant sprinting at you at that speed. It's kind of a scary thought. Now, from range, the Gundam used a similar beam rifle to the gun cannon, but this weapon also had an underslung option called a super napalm launcher. It's a 4-tube rocket launcher that basically does exactly what it says in the tin: fire napalm powerful enough to melt a mobile suit. Now, sadly, it's not seen often in the series. The Gundam could also use a hyper bazooka, which was essentially the Federation's answer to the 240mm bazookas that the Zaku II uses. Aside from the beam rifle, the Gundam also uses 2 beam sabers contained on its back. Now, yes, these are obviously meant to be like lightsabers from Star Wars. For anyone who doesn't know, Gundam is sort of like Japan's Star Wars, in the sense that it's their most famous sci-fi franchise from their region, and Gundam obviously takes a good amount of inspiration from George Lucas's work. Regardless, the Gundam could easily dual-wield these weapons in combat. Another thing that the Gundam could do is merge the 2 sabers into a larger weapon called a beam javelin, giving the machine another option to use in close-quarters combat. It also sported a large, thick shield for protection, which obviously would keep the main unit protected, but would also assist the Gundam should it find itself needing to re-enter Earth's atmosphere on its own, which a Zaku II was not capable of doing. In a lot of ways, the Gundam is a form of escalation. The Federation completed a mobile suit that essentially made the Zaku II into a joke, and used its technology that was much more devastating than anything Zeon had in their mobile suits. At this point, mass production was made a priority. The RX-79 Gundam ground type was commissioned at the same time, alongside the RX-78 NT-1, which was being developed at the Augusta base on Earth, starting in September of that year. We'll talk more about that one later. What was commissioned at this time was also the very first Pegasus-class carrier, called the White Base. Now in September, our old friend Lieutenant Commander Char Aznable managed to spot the White Base as it made its approach to Side 7, seemingly by chance, where it was meant to pick up Units 1, 2, and 3 of the Gundam. It's at this point that the animated series finally begins. The first few episodes of the show are an event that goes down in history as the attack on Side 7, which, given the location of things, I suppose would make sense. It would be kind of weird if they called it Zeon's Quest for Italian Sausage, now wouldn't it? Now, let's talk a little bit more about what Side 7 exactly is. So here's our map of the space colonies. Side 7, over here, is also known as Noah, spelled N-O-A, and at the time was actually just one colony instead of a cluster of them. Hidden here was the R&D base that was responsible for Operation V testing and development, alongside the Earthbound counterparts that it had. It also had a close proximity to Luna 2, which was the Federation's last major stronghold in space at the time. It would remain a stronghold for decades, and we'll probably mention it more as we continue to work our way through the Gundam catalog over the years. As the White Base arrives at Side 7, we see a couple of notable things going on. First is that Side 7 is secretly infiltrated by Zaku IIs. Now you might be asking yourself, Micah, Zaku IIs are huge, how do they infiltrate a colony? Well, I'm glad you asked, dear viewer. You see, the average size of a colony in Gundam is about 6.4 kilometers, or for those of us who, speak freedom, a little under 4 miles. In length, they're about 36 kilometers, or 22 miles. Now, it probably doesn't seem that big to you, but I'll just say as someone who used to get around the city I live in only via walking, you get a new appreciation for how big 1 mile is. Now, to put it into maybe a more numerical scale so that you can just see it here on your monitor, let's just convert this into feet. Once we do that, it becomes a little bit more understandable as to why a Zaku could infiltrate a structure like that, considering a Zaku is around 60 feet tall, which is by no means anything to sneeze at, but a colony is 116,000 feet long and almost 21,000 feet tall. Okay, enough of the numbers. During the opening, we're introduced to some key characters that I honestly haven't spoken at length about yet. One notable conversation is between Lieutenant Tem Ray, the lead developer for Project V, and, at the time, Ensign Bright Noah. This conversation, while brief, gives the idea of just how bad the war is going. Bright, who is, oddly enough, only 19 years old at the time, has only been in the military for 6 months. They note that guerrilla fighters around Bright's age and younger are fighting down on Earth. One good example that we will actually see as this goes on in Asia is a young lady named Kiki Rosita, who, under her father's command at the time of this particular instance, would actually be on the ground in Asia fighting Zeon forces via guerrilla tactics. It's here that we're also introduced to our hero, Amuro Ray. He's a bit of an engineering nerd like his father, and we see that Amuro is a bit withdrawn, antisocial, and just prefers to focus on the stuff that he's working on rather than, honestly, pay attention to much else. Now, he's made aware of a military action by his friend Frau Bo, who is accompanied by Haro, a robot of Amuro's design. As they finally start to leave, Frau takes a second to lecture Amuro's across-the-street neighbor, Hayato Kobayashi, who seems a bit miffed about shuffling that had to be done while Project V was being conducted, and since Amuro's dad is in charge of it, you can kind of understand why there'd be a little bit of resentment there. Regardless, during this sequence, one of the Zeon pilots that infiltrated the colony breaks rank, and begins to open fire in the colony, despite prior orders just to do recon. He manages to destroy a couple of mobile suit prototypes, and a counterattack from the Federation forces begins. The next result is horrifying, which in hindsight really made this series way ahead of its time. There's a lot of death here, both in civilian numbers and military, and you realize right out of the gate that this is no Super Robot story. Not that Super Robot stories couldn't have more mature themes. Tamino, the creator of this show, was actually really, really good at it, alongside, of course, Go Nagai and Ken Ishikawa, and then, of course, Osamu Tezuka could also introduce more mature themes into some of his work, and he's actually who Tamino studied under. Regardless, though, the first episode basically starts with death and pain. However, as this goes on and an explosion happens, Amuro sees a manual that's flown next to him that's from Project V. One thing to note during the horror of this is the performances of 4 voice actors, depending on which version you watch. Now, as you saw when we showed you the characters, of course, as they show up during the episode, and you see who their voice actors are, praise needs to be heaped on Toru Furuya and Brad Swale for their portrayal as Amuro, and both Suichi Ikeda and the recently, sadly departed Michael Kopsa for their portrayals of Char Aznable. All 4 VAs really do a great job of showing Amuro's fear and nervousness during these scenes, and I really enjoy the subtle annoyances that Char's voice actors show when he hears about his men attacking the colony against his orders. It's the little things that matter. Now, the tide of the battle turns after a bunch of civilians get turned to ash in a really chilling sequence that honestly pulls on your heartstrings, especially when Frau sees her mother's dead, mangled body, and she's understandably in hysterics. It's also a character-defining moment for Amuro. Not just the show's first slap, mind you, but he immediately knuckles down and realizes that he has to take on the burdens of the situation. Now, you might ask yourself, why Amuro slaps her? Well, my friend Wu Fei has an answer.
'Cause she's a woman!
In all seriousness, he begs Frau to go. And despite all of the tears and pain of what she's seeing and he's seeing, they do exactly what they need to do. Frau gets moving, and Amuro sprints into the cockpit of his father's machine that was designed. And it's from here that Amuro finds his destiny. As you can see, the 120mm Zaku machine gun does nothing to the Gundam's armor. Though the Gundam runs out of ammo for its Vulcans, Amuro uses the immense physical power of his mobile suit to ragdoll a Zaku 2. Now keep in mind that a mobile suit weighs over 70 tons, fully armored. And the Gundam just shoved it over like he's a bully. I mean, he might as well thrown that Zaku in a locker. From here, he makes mincemeat out of the Zaku as it tries to retreat, carving it in two before it can really react. Now the problem is that the reactor to the Zaku detonates, which is nuclear, and that of course blows a hole in the colony. This, of course, adversely affects Amuro's own father, and the consequences of that will be felt later. Now, Amuro is much smarter in dropping the second Zaku, stabbing it through the cockpit and killing the pilot. Now, even after this, the colony is in a desperate situation. Char's Musai has begun to attack the colony to cover for its one retreating Zaku. There's civilian and military casualties as Amuro does what he can to try to aid the White Base in recovering mobile suit supplies. Unfortunately, the White Base's captain is badly wounded by shrapnel during Char's attack, as Ryu Jose tries to take his position on the guns to relieve him. The captain is tough as nails, though. He's still running the ship while he's being sutured up. Losses are devastating, and I'll let Bright give the damage report.
I regret to report that every soldier and engineer on Side 7 is gone, all destroyed by only 2 Zakus. Of the survivors, only 10 men are combat ready, so it's looking bleak, sir.
During the sequence, we're also briefly introduced to Sayla Mass, who I'll talk about here in a minute, just to reiterate everyone who exactly that is, and then of course Mirai Yashima, who volunteers to aid as the helmswoman since she has experience with cruiser-class ships. The captain also alludes that her family is one of standing, though we don't know the extent of such, not until later. On the Zeon side of things, we have a conversation between Admiral Dozle Zabi, who is the head of the Space Forces, and, of course, Captain Char Aznable, which shows exactly the kind of commander that Dozle is. He is practical, to say the least. When Char tells him about finding Project V, which is a huge discovery, and the damage that the Gundam could do, Dozle immediately understands what the situation is and its severity, dropping any gripes he has about Char missing a party, and gets his captain exactly what he needs to continue to press the attack. From here, White Base continues to try and recover from the assault and become combat ready. Frau Bo and Sayla take off to try and find more survivors, but not before Sayla meets up with Ryu and they meet Kai Shiden. And Kai finds out what the Five Fingers said to the face when he reveals that he was basically hiding from everything instead of helping out. It's here that I need to reiterate something from the last episode of the series. It's at this point that Char infiltrates the colony himself and comes face to face with Sayla. Now, if you haven't watched the first episode of the 1 Year War Explained, I'll fill you in on the relationship between these two. Both Sayla and Char aren't really Sayla and Char. Their real names are Artesia and Casval Daikun respectively, and they are the only children of the founder of Zeon, Zeon Zum Daikun. They have not seen each other in years, by the way, thus Char's disbelief that that's actually his sister in front of him. From here, Amuro's got to torch the remaining MS parts to make sure that they don't get into Zeon hands. This is smart, considering the advantage that the few mobile suits that the Federation has at this point are going to make a big difference. Not to mention, you also have to consider that, they don't really mention this, but part of that wreckage that's there is what's left of Gundam Unit 1, which would be a nightmare if Zeon gets their hands on it. So he uses an underslung grenade launcher called the Super Napalm Launcher to destroy it. As I mentioned when we were breaking down the Gundam beforehand, basically this is napalm that's able to burn through the type of material that these mobile suits are made out of, Gundanium. Now, unfortunately, this isn't a sub-weapon that gets used again, and I really wish they had because it would have come in handy in some scenarios, but that's just me griping. We actually wouldn't see a weapon like this in Gundam until the RX-78's much later successor in the RX-0 Banshee Norn, which would have a similar underslung grenade launcher under the beam magnum. And just as a side note, the Banshee Norn is actually my favorite of the 3 unicorns, but sadly it's piloted by an absolute shithead. We'll get to him another time, though. Anyway, from here, Char narrowly escapes the colony after everyone opens fire on him, but Amuro gives chase in the Gundam to try to catch him. 2 Zakus get launched, one of which is approaching at 3 times normal speed. The captain immediately recognizes that that's Char's machine, and it's here that we get our first battle between 2 men who would essentially change the future of the Universal Century. All things considered, it's a pretty even fight, with Char's mobility giving Amuro trouble, but the Gundam's specs and its armor helping him to keep up. Amuro then fires his rifle at the other Zaku, and Char is in absolute horror at the power of that weapon, considering it blows up a Zaku in one blast. After Char retreats, the ship begins to head towards Luna 2, and the crew finally gets to meet Amuro face to face. Now, Bright does lay down the law to Amuro about his new responsibilities, and we start to see the first bits of what would end up being a much larger clash between the two later on. Now, things continue onward, and the pace of the series does start to move a bit quicker. Episode 3 starts by showing Char's uncertainty after fighting the Gundam for the first time, in shock of what he had seen. It's here that a Papua-class ship is deployed to take care of any resupply that Char needs. Now, at the time of this battle, the Papua is actually starting to become a little bit outdated in the Zeon military. But these humble ships could actually resupply up to 2 Musai-class cruisers simultaneously. They were also effective as mobile suit carriers, meaning that they were pretty versatile considering most Zeon military strategy centered around mobile suits. In this case, it's under the command of Captain Gundam, who was part of some of the very first mobile suit combat to ever be seen in a Universal Century, using his trusty Zaku 1. On the White Base, they notice that Char's ship is going to be resupplied. They take a vote, and they decide to attack during the resupply to catch their enemy off balance, as opposed to using the advantage to flee to Luna 2 that much faster. The battle honestly kind of goes as you'd expect, with a few little details that emerge from it. The first is that Amuro actually does have a knack for strategic thought, realizing that he and Ryu should attack with the sun behind their back, as opposed to putting themselves at a disadvantage. For Char, you can tell that he's actually still shaken by exactly how capable the enemy is, the specs of the Gundam, and what kind of a monster he's up against. For the first time in his military career, he feels like he's on the back foot. Oh, speaking of foot... Now, side note, I actually have to say that I really like the fight in this episode. It's one of my favorite in the series. Plus, they do a great job of showing just how chaotic surprise attacks are in a wartime scenario. There's an obvious desperation that Char has in fighting the Gundam, plus the Musai having problems with the resupply. There's also communication issues with the core fighter that Ryu's piloting, leading to the first launch of Kai and Hayato in the gun tank to provide long-range support. The battle ends with Gundam asking Char to leave now that he has his supplies, but since Gundam's ship is toast, he charges the Gundam to try to buy Char some time. He seems to have a little bit of luck in melee range, but sadly loses his life in the process. The White Base retreats as well. After the battle, the White Base heads to the Federation base of Luna 2, and they get met with some crappy news. First, Luna 2 is not able to take civilian refugees, meaning all the civilians on White Base are still stuck there. They're going to get sent to Earth, basically. Given the situation and how little they know, Luna 2 begins to detain the White Base's crew, considering that it's a secret project. Top secret. So, the fact that civilians were actually on this thing and piloting and running the damn thing, it's kind of a worrying thing for the Federation military. Granted, one thing I will admit completely, though I can understand why the Commandant of Luna 2, Joaquin, does what he's doing, he's being a cocky idiot with some of his strategy and honestly dismissing some of the things that Bright is saying just because Bright's an ensign. He thinks that Char's not going to attack Luna 2. Well, take a wild guess where that assumption leads. One interesting note right before the attack is that Amuro, for his compatriots on the White Base that are in his cell with him, it does a bit of an explain like I'm 5 on the Gundam's learning computer. The basic idea is that it retains combat information from battle to battle, allowing the machine to adapt to combat scenarios from what the machine has learned previously. This basically gives Amuro the tools he needs to keep up with his opponents, combined with the Gundam's superior armor and weaponry. It's one thing, essentially, for a pilot to learn from fight to fight. It's another thing for his machine to learn with him, giving the two a combined pool of knowledge. And then, of course, this is in tandem with the Gundam's superior armor and weaponry. Now, as a fun note, this sort of thing didn't actually stay standard with Gundams after this. Now, the RX-72, of course, has this feature, but other RX-78 models didn't have the same functionality. In the Gundam Expanded universe, however, this idea would be put on steroids in the After Colony timeline, where the Zero system and the Epion system would go so far as to enhance the pilots of their machines with a thinking computer on a level to where they were basically operating with a second brain. And it's even debated on whether or not Wing Zero and the Epion were actually self-aware. Discussion for another time, though. Back to Bright, Ryu, Amuro, and Hayato, they actually manage to break out of their cell after Char attacks. They get back to the White Base, but Char manages to catch a Magellan-class ship with a trap, because, again, the Commandant was being an arrogant idiot. From here, we have a little bit more conflict between the Commandant and Bright, but thankfully Captain Paulo manages to talk some sense into the Commandant so that the White Base crew can defend Luna 2 from Char and his men. They're unfortunately forced to destroy the Magellan to get the White Base out. Now, to explain something, Magellan-class ships are big, expensive ships that, honestly, they can't afford to lose at this point. So it kind of emphasizes just how desperate their situation is, and why they're a bit hesitant to do it in the first place, but they realize that they honestly don't have any options here. Now, out on the battlefield, this is the first time we see Amuro use a dual-wielding method for Gundam beam sabers. But, unfortunately, the animation in this episode kind of blows, so it's a bit of an underwhelming moment. This is actually where we get the first appearance of Fat Gundam, so, yeah, this is one where apparently they weren't budgeting quite right, or they had to rush some things. Anyway, after this, the White Base prepares itself to descend to Earth. Now, one cool part is that we get some great character moments with Amuro and the civilians. You start to really realize that Amuro is just a humble, sort of antisocial kid who just has a knack for engineering. I mentioned that earlier, but I feel the need to emphasize the humble part, because he's really doing the best he can with what he has, and to be honest with you, he's kind of shouldering a lot of burden, considering, despite not having any piloting experience before this, is the best pilot with the best machine, and because he is the best pilot with the best machine, there'll be a lot put on his shoulders as it goes on, and his tendency to take burdens on his shoulders might start to collapse him. Anyway, after this, the White Base prepares for re-entry, as you would expect them to do, considering what I just mentioned, and Char attacks them while they're vulnerable, because that's what Char do. We start to see the inexperience of the general White Base crew here, and sadly, in the midst of the battle, as they're trying to figure out how to run machine guns on White Base, as Amuro is doing what he can, he runs out of ammo in his bazooka. Now, he does manage to nail a Zaku 2 with his Vulcans, showing that those Vulcans can actually drop a mobile suit at close range. It's also here that we're introduced to one of my favorite Gundam weapons ever. Ladies and gentlemen who are watching this video that should hit the like button and subscribe if they haven't already, and smash it like this Zaku is about to get smashed, meet the Gundam Hammer. Yeah, it can deflect bazooka shots. It's awesome. I could have alluded to this already, but you want to see what happens when it hits a mobile suit? Check this out. Another thing to note is that Amuro is basically soloing Char and several Zaku 2s at the same time. He's getting better at a very fast rate. Now, Char aborts the mission alongside White Base, but unfortunately for him, he loses a soldier in the process. We also get to see what the Gundam is able to do when it comes to re-entry, and then it can actually survive it, which is nuts considering what happens to the Zaku that Amuro was fighting beforehand. I mean, let's have a look.
Commander Char!
Ooh, that looked like it hurt. Anyway, after re-entry, we're introduced to Captain Garma Zabi. Now, I mentioned him earlier in the episode, so I'm not going to go too much into detail on him. Unfortunately for White Base, they've basically entered Earth right in Garma's territory, specifically in the western part of what we would know as the United States of America. As Char and Garma get to talking, we get the history between the two of them. Basically, both men studied at the same military academy that I mentioned in the first episode of the Explained series, and they formed a friendship there. Over on White Base, the lieutenant that's taking command of the ship after his ship wasn't able to re-enter properly in the last episode is being a prick. Partially because of his injury, partially because he's leaning way too much on his command and not enough on actual combat experience in dealing with Char and Zeon forces. Anyway, the pilots are ordered to deploy in their mobile suits again, and Amuro, despite not really getting nearly enough rest, decides to gut it out. Amuro and Hayato launch in the gun tank under Amuro and Hayato's, well, suggestions, but sadly they have to switch out after some time due to the inability to punch through the aerial attack. Fact is, they just need more forces on the ground. The resistance that they're facing from Zeon is a Gau attack carrier, DOP snub fighters, and Magella attack tanks. Now, the Gau attack carrier is both a bomber and a transport craft meant specifically for terrestrial warfare. These things are big and slow, and are basically designed by a bunch of idiots who never set foot on the Earth, and you can tell because their maneuverability sucks. However, it at least could carry the function of mobile suit and snub fighter transport fairly competently. It's just bad at getting out of the way of things. Even so, it did have rudimentary defenses, being equipped with 3 twin mega particle guns, 4 beam cannons, a bomb bay — it'd be a pretty shitty bomber if it didn't — alongside anti-aircraft machine guns. As for the DOP, these were your typical Zeon snub fighters. These, like the Gau, were developed by a bunch of people who had never been on Earth before, so everything was put together via simulation. These things could be quite speedy, hitting up to Mach 5, but their range was shit. So they relied on quick deployments, usually from Gaus. Now, the Magella tanks are actually kind of neat. Now, these little guys have your typical tank weapons. They were equipped with a 175mm cannon that could also be pulled off and put onto different mobile suits, and it also had a 3-barrel 35mm machine gun. However, what makes these things unique is the top of the tank is actually able to separate from the bottom using VTOL engines. It could really only do this for a few minutes, but if nothing else, it gave the tank a little bit more versatility than the Federation's Type 62. Amuro then heads out in the Gundam, and the gun tank has Kai switch with Amuro for the gun tank crew. Ryu then heads out in the core fighter. It's here that we start to see Amuro's demeanor get a little bit more frazzled, mostly due to his lack of rest. Garma deploys 3 Zakus, but Char's not going out. Instead, he's letting Garma take the brunt of the assault. Amuro's assault in the Gundam starts to pick the Zeon apart, so they switch tactics and decide to attack from range, which puts Amuro on the back foot and rattles him. So, in response to their switching tactics, Amuro switches tactics to a tried and true classic. It's called Fuck You. At this point, Amuro's pretty fucking worn out, to the point where he just crashes in his pilot uniform in his room. You start to realize that this kid has been fighting battles almost daily after seeing his home colony wrecked. So on top of having to witness a bunch of civilians get wrecked in combat, he's gotta fight in a fucking war. So he's having a rough time. So rough, he didn't even want pie and soda. Personally, I'm of the opinion that pie and soda is a great de-stressor, but that's just me. Anyway, Char's in the shower. Aside for some fan service of the ladies, you get the sense that Garma really does have a lot of admiration for Char, in what I'm assuming is a non-gay way, but regardless, the big motivation for the purple-held nepotism beneficiary is to impress his sister Caecilia. The next day, both he and Char spending time trying to analyze the Gundam and its capabilities. Elsewhere, there's issues on the White Base. Again, the civilians on the ship are basically fed up with being on a warship and just want to land on Earth and leave. As for the White Base crew, they're debating how and when to let the evacuees off, and the fact that there are basically 100 people that are a drain on rations. They're also looking to modify the catapult on the ship so they can launch the core fighter at a much higher altitude to try and contact Federation HQ for reinforcements. And, shit. The old people took hostages. How did that happen? And also Kai's being a dick. Well, anyway, Amuro goes ahead and takes off to try to contact the Feddies, and because of the G-forces, he passes out. Garma and Char, of course, notice the launch and try to pursue. As for the old people, Bright, Sayla, Ryu, and Hayato go to deal with the geriatric impatience among the civvies, and you realize pretty quick that hostages wasn't even what was happening, and they really just wanted a status update. Well, you old geriatric fucks, why not just go request to go to the bridge? Anyway, Mirai's trying to contact Amuro and getting no response. Sadly, this is probably the best sleep he's got in a while. I wonder what he's dreaming about.
僕を助ける。
そう、アムロは本当は戦いたくないんでしょ？争いはやめよう。みんな友達だもの。話せばわかるはずよ。
Wow, that was weird. Anyway, Amuro wakes up to find Char in pursuit of him, which ends with him shaking around his joystick like a 4-year-old about to crash while playing Flight Simulator. Then his brain wakes up and he realizes he's got a maneuverability advantage, considering that Char's fighter is just a re-entry capsule instead of something that's actually meant for long-term dogfighting. Now, even though he manages to hit Char's fighter, Dops show up. Amuro gets recalled to White Base, and Kai gets kind of shitty about it.
I just knew it
Falcon Punch!
Okay, that was satisfying. Bright even threatens to chuck him out of the ship. Fucking A, man. Anyway, they convert the core fighter into the Gundam for an aerial fight, but not before Amuro starts to lose his nerve. Thankfully for Amuro, Sayla does a really good job of giving him some confidence. Amuro, after that, starts shooting down Dops like he's playing fucking Duck Hunt. And then Amuro and Char once again clash. Now, as that fight goes on, those dumbass old people literally come out in the middle of a goddamn combat situation to throw a fucking tantrum on the bridge. These are the most selfish old people ever. Okay, I don't know if we're keeping a tally of who wins in these Char/Amuro fights, but if we are, sure dude, are we? Ah, there it is, thank you. We gotta give this one to Char, given he forces Amuro to retreat during the freefall. Even though he's doing well, Char's asked to retreat by Garma after revealing that he's figured out that the Gundam's a modular weapon that can swap out to different mobile suits and things of that nature. Back with the geriatric fucks, these goofs just want off while they're in the middle of Zeon-controlled territory. Yeah, that'll go over well. Now, Amuro rightly tells them off, and then they finally leave after Mirai asks him to send back Frau Bo. Now, after this, Lieutenant Reed is being a dick again. Bright has the White Base flying low through a mountain range, and both Char and Garma deduce that they're doing this to effectively use Minovsky particle density in a way so that Garma's forces couldn't use radar-reliant weaponry to pound the ship from range. So, from here, they'll have to set up an ambush if they hope to bring the ship down. Thing is, Bright understands that as well, so Gundam's about to be in another fight. Then the old people come by again, and just say, drop us off at a nearby town. Though it is a little bit of an ask, especially considering, once again, they're in a potential combat situation, Bright goes for a middle ground solution and asks for a ceasefire with the Zeon forces. Char and Garma agree to it, largely to give themselves a chance to prepare an even bigger ground force to bring down the White Base. The thing is, Char is once again completely fine with Garma taking the blame here if the plan fails. Hijinks continue to ensue as Kai blows a hole in the transport carrier to try and fool the enemy with something. Once they get airborne, and they've got the civilians on the way, at least a small amount of them, they are approached by a Zeon Lugum. Now, the Zeon Lugum are reconnaissance aircraft that are pretty minimally armed. They only carry twin machine guns and a couple of missile launchers. It also has a small bay for bombs, too. One neat little thing about this craft is they can actually transport Zaku 2s over short distances. And that's really all there is to say about that thing. Anyway, Kai and Frau push smoke out of the hole that Kai made earlier with an explosion, and the ship goes down for an emergency landing. Then a few of the White Base crew head out in jetpacks to lure the Zeon pilots away. It works for a little bit, but one of the Zeon pilots has a bit of a bleeding heart, and then heads to check on the mother and her child that were part of the civilian group. From here, the Gundam is deployed from the transport rather sneakily. Now, for a split second, Amuro thinks the ship is going to see him. He ends up right, but not at that exact moment. The ship turns around after seeing a glare from his mobile suit, and it forces Amuro to shoot him down. Well, at least before they spotted Amuro, they gave the woman and her kid some supplies, so there's that. Back at the White Base, they're under attack. The gun cannon deploys, and Kai does what Kai does best, and gets beat up a bit while freaking out. Luckily for him, the gun cannon is a beast of a mobile suit. Now, while Kai fires back, and has a little bit of success, he sadly runs out of ammo, but then, luckily for him, Amuro comes in from behind enemy lines, right as Char figures out what they were going for. From here, the gun tank and the Gundam start shredding Dops left and right. Amuro even pulls a Captain America and takes out a Magella top tank with a shield throw. Then he does it again to a Zaku. Kai also uses Shove Fu to take one out as well. It goes without saying Garma's strategy ended up being a failure. As for the young woman, her son, and the two nice Zeon pilots, they revealed that the town her husband was raised in, St. Angus, was destroyed. The next day, there's more issues going on. The White Base is low on ammo, Kai's throwing a fit about the pilots getting bigger rations, and Amuro is dealing with a bit of shell shock from all the fights he's been in. He's in fact having trouble sleeping and eating. Lieutenant Reed actually suggests abandoning the White Base because they're low on ammo, but the discussion really doesn't go that far. Bright tries to send Amuro on patrol, but Amuro throws a bit of a tantrum. Realizing that the kid's tired, Hayato and Ryu take his place, with Ryu noticing that with as tired as Amuro is, he doesn't need to be going out, and considering how much he's done thus far, he kind of deserves a little bit of rest. On Garma's ship, they notice the White Base's patrol, and Garma's getting ready to head out personally. Now, Char tries to convince him otherwise, and Garma wisely listens after Char points out that they should just wait for the scouts to head back to base, then pursue them. You really get the sense up to this point that Garma's worried way too much about impressing his sister, and not enough about being a wise leader. Now, Garma is well liked within Zeon for his actions in the invasion, but the fact is that this is the first time that his forces have fought anything that could really fight back on even footing. So he's not really thinking smart, on top of never really facing someone that he can't bully into submission with superior tech. The attack commences and Amuro's in a rough spot. He doesn't want a sortie due to all of his prior issues I mentioned beforehand. While Kai, Hayato, and Ryu head out in the gun cannon and gun tank respectively, Bright and Amuro have an argument. This leads to the infamous Bright slap. And then he hits him again, this time with a backhand. At this particular moment, even Frau tells him to stop being so pathetic. Now, Amuro, oddly enough, gets shaken up by this. But not so much by the blunt force trauma, but rather their disappointment. Because they both admit that they see something in Amuro. They believe in him. They respect what he's done, but what he's doing right now by throwing a tantrum is beneath him, to be honest with you. The thing is, this is war. Your options are fight or die. Now, one thing I've been asked in the past from other Gundam fans is whether or not I feel like this was the right thing for Bright to do in slapping Amuro. In a word, yeah. Some people might think that Amuro is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, but at this point of the story, that's not really the case. I hate it when people use that term willy-nilly. I have friends that are war veterans that have suffered from PTSD, and throwing that term around where it doesn't really apply is just kind of sickening, to be honest with you. Not to mention, if you look at the list of symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, Amuro is actually only suffering from a couple of them out of the myriad that exist. On top of that, he snaps out of his issues pretty quickly. People with post-traumatic stress disorder do not snap out of their issues quick. The fact of the matter is that he's a teenager thrown into a war and has a lot of burdens on his shoulders, and sometimes when you burden yourself too much, you're gonna break under the pressure. That's basically what's happening here. Not to mention, this kind of spoils the future for Amuro Ray, but in later series he appears in, he doesn't have any symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder whatsoever. So no, he doesn't have it here. Slapping him was the right move. Anyway, back to the battle. Mobile suits seem to be having some issues with the fighters. Now, Amuro switches up the strategy a little bit. Basically, the Gundam starts jumping like Amuro is doing his best Michael Jordan impression, and he's shooting Dops out of the air while he's doing it. He even starts counting the ones he's shooting down. Hell, he fucking boots one out of the air, just punt kicks it. And even after he runs out of ammo, he just starts jumping again, and this time uses his beam saber. Because, like I said, fuck it is a proper strategy. Also, Garma asks for cover fire from the Gao, and they're not talking back because Char fucked with the communications earlier. Anyway, somebody shows up in a Federation vehicle and, God damn it. Redhead addiction's flaring up again. Anyway, Lieutenant Matilda's here. Lieutenant Matilda Ajan here is the head of the Medea Supply Corps, and comes in to resupply the White Base, get the wounded lieutenant out of there on top of a good chunk of the civilians as well. One thing that's distinct about this is that she actually wasn't sent on general order from the Federation, but rather straight from General Revel. That actually does factor in later. Now, one thing that gets debated here is when Lieutenant Matilda is heaping praise on Amuro, trying to boost his spirits a bit, Lieutenant Matilda calls Amuro a psychic, or in the Japanese translation, Matilda calls him an esper. And people tend to think that this is an allusion to new types. I never really thought that was the case, to be honest. I more or less think she's just commenting on how good of a pilot Amuro is. Not to mention the concept of the new type wasn't something that was widely known by the military at that point. There had been, of course, the philosophies of Char's father, but it still wasn't something that had been scientifically researched on a big level, especially in the Federation, at least not yet. Alright, back to Char and Garma, and we find people kissing Garma's ass. Now, Char, on the other hand, is more interested in getting his drink on. Now, it's here, at this party, that we see that Garma is actually dating the daughter of the mayor of the town that they're in. There's some star-crossed lover stuff going on, where Garma thinks that if he captures White Base in the Gundam, his dad will let him marry the Earth Lady. If not, fuck it, he's just gonna leave the military. Though it's nice and romantic and stuff, the fluffy romance gets interrupted by the fact that his forces need to mobilize, or the White Base is gonna escape to Federation airspace. White Base parks itself inside the remnants of an old stadium to try to let enemy forces pass by them. The old people are being stupid again, and Frau tells them to stop. Back with Garma's booty call, she tries to leave even though she knows Garma just went into a fucking battle, and her father slaps her for her trouble. Now, why did she do something so stupid?
'Cause she's a woman.
Anyway, back to the fight. Char volunteers to sortie this time to lead the ground forces. Well, ground forces is just 3 Zakus, so there's not much to say there. It's more of a scouting party. Amuro heads out to draw them away. During the fight, Char notices what Amuro is trying to do, and takes this opportunity to get out his people I need to kill list that he came up with when he joined the Zeon military, and uses White Base to scratch Garma off of it by luring Garma's Gao straight into enemy fire.
Hey, Garma, you read me? Blame this on the misfortune of your birth. Don't take it personally. You can thank your father.
You double-crossed me, Char! I'm a son of the Zabi family. I'll go down with honor. Glory to the Principality of Zeon!
It's here that Garma goes down in flames, and though the White Base don't realize it, they just took out the commander of the invasion force. The Zabi family are obviously pretty taken aback by the whole thing, but while they're discussing goings-on, it's pretty obvious that that shithead Giran has his own plans for how Garma's funeral is going to be approached. He continues to push for a state funeral even though his father wants something more private. And the family also blames Char for his death as well. Which, I mean, they're not wrong, but they don't know why. Either way, Degwin relents and tells Dozel to relegate Char to another unit. The next day, there's another attack. This time from 3 Gao carriers. Ryu and Amuro head out in the gun cannon and Gundam respectively. Now, there's not really a whole lot to say about this fight, except that Iselina, Garma's aforementioned booty call, is on one of the Gaos, and we see the debut of the beam javelin. Now, don't get me wrong, this is a pretty cool sequence. I just wouldn't call this episode one that has a ton of long-term plot consequences. It's mostly action, and it just kind of fills in a blank. Anyway, Char shows up in a Lugum, starts to even the odds, damages White Base, and then they have to do an emergency landing. Then the refugees do a dumb and try to leave during a damn attack in the middle of nowhere. Then the refugees realize that if you fuck around at a 10, you find out at a 10, and Char opens fire on them as they approach, probably thinking that they were enemy combatants. There was a sandstorm, after all. The battle continues, and Amuro, of course, brings out that Gundam javelin, piercing it into the wing of one of the Gaos. The other Gao gets spanked by ground fire, giving Amuro a chance to cut his Gao in half with the javelin, which is fucking stylish as hell. The other Gao manages to ram the Gundam as it crash lands, but it doesn't destroy it. Garma's booty call tries to shoot Amuro, but she ends up fainting instead, then falling to her death. Or she died before she fired. Either way, she's dead. After this, Char retreats. Amuro and the other pilots give her a burial, and then the refugees finally fuck off. Now, all cursing and jokes aside, this is actually a pretty sad ending to this episode. Garma, despite being a Zabi, never really committed any atrocities during his military service. At least nothing compared to the military actions his brothers pulled off. In the end, like Char said, he was a spoiled rich kid that was only betrayed by Char because of what Degwin did to Char's father. This drove his lover to try and get revenge, and it ended up killing her and more of Garma's men. His final recording to his father showed that Garma did want to earn his station. Showing his desire to please his family might have blinded him a bit, but it did come from a place of love for his father, and he just wanted to make him proud. As Zeon prepares their state funeral for Garma, and Char is inevitably going to be reassigned, we're introduced to another one of Zeon's heroes from the Battle of Loom. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to my favorite Zeon pilot not named Haman Karn, the Blue Giant, Captain Ramba Ral. We see him briefly on the same day as Garma's funeral, mostly to just show that his job on Earth, the reason you're seeing him now, is to avenge Garma's death. As for Amuro, he's still having a rough one, not sleeping well and just fidgeting with electronics to try to keep himself occupied. He at least does take some time to chow on some sandwiches, though. Now, granted, being worn out is kind of going around the white base, with Bright obviously being a bit high-strung too, to the point where he actually yells at one of the war orphans for cleaning. Now, you might be asking yourself, Micah, why are the war orphans still here but the rest of the civilians left? On a storyline level, I'm going to assume that the civilians, because they've been assholes up to this point, were assholes again and forgot them, but in reality, Tamino just needed comic relief. Regardless, Bright apologizes to the kids, and then tries to get a little bit of rest, but sadly gets called back to the bridge pretty quickly afterwards, even though Mirai's trying to help him relax. Not in that way, stop being perverted. They don't make Hathaway yet. Anyway, with White Base being attacked again, they're in a bit of a rough spot considering they have to deal with vehicles that have gained speed due to re-entry. They can't get away from them. So White Base is forced to land, and as they're getting ready to fight, Ryu finds Amuro in a spaced-out state, something fierce, and wakes him up. He actually has to be guided by hand to the launch bay. He's that tired. Ramba also heads out to fight alongside two Zakus. Now you might be asking yourself what this blue behemoth is that he's piloting. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to the MS-07B Gouf. This mobile suit is a melee powerhouse. It was developed for a couple of specific purposes. First, it's built first and foremost to be a ground unit, so battles on Earth, essentially. It features a much improved backpack from the Zaku, on top of leg thrusters as well, making it considerably faster and much more maneuverable. For its armaments, it has a 5-barrel 75mm machine gun built into the fingers of its left hand. It also has a shield mounted onto the same arm. In its right forearm, it has what's called a heat rod, which, when it impacts its target, it delivers high-voltage electrical shocks. And as you'd expect from a weapon called a heat rod, it can be superheated as well to cut into targets. Now, its most notable weapon is its heat sword. Like the Zaku's Heat Hawk, it's a superheated blade, but it runs a bit hotter than the Heat Hawk and can cut through tougher materials. The mobile suit's left hand can also be switched out for a normal hand, and the mobile suit can even use any weapons that a Zaku 2 can, on top of weapons that other Zeon suits that we will see later are also able to use. Now, thankfully for Amuro, getting launched into battle wakes him up a little bit, and he runs right into the Gouf. He tries his best, but between the exhausted and Ramba Ral's ability to strategize on the fly and his piloting skills, Amuro takes a beating. When Ramba gets into close range, he's able to trash the Gundam's bazooka with his heat rod and little to no trouble. Now, thankful for Amuro, he gets back up from the white base. So, everybody splits up and Ramba and Amuro go one-on-one. And Amuro finds out that the Gouf is, well, I'll let Ramba tell you.
This is no Zaku, boy! No Zaku!
Now, the fight does end in Ramba and his forces being forced to retreat, but it goes without saying that Ramba has established himself as a threat that could easily be as dangerous as Char was. As Amuro returns, he gets in there in time to watch Girin's speech at Garma's funeral.
We have lost a true hero to our glorious and noble cause.
but are we defeated? No! For us, this is a new beginning. It's been over 50 years since the elite of Earth, consumed by greed, took control of the Earth Federation. Our citizens have seen nothing but oppression. We want our freedom. Never forget the times when the Federation has trampled us. We, the Principality of Zeon, have had a long and arduous struggle to achieve freedom. Our fight is sacred, our cause divine. My beloved brother Garma was sacrificed. Why?
The spoiled brat.
The war is at a stalemate. Garma has opened your eyes to the blinding truth of your complacency. We are finally in a position where victory is within our grasp. Zeon thirsts for the strength of its people. Once again, our most cherished nation will flourish. Victory is the greatest tribute we can pay those who have sacrificed their lives for us. Hail Zeon! Hail Zeon! Hail Zeon! Hail Zeon! Hail Zeon!
Now, Bryant knows what's going on, and he calls it perfectly. Girin wants to turn Zeon into a world dictatorship, and Amuro and company realize that they're in for one hell of a fight going forward. However, on the Earth, they are not alone. In the jungles of Southeast Asia, Ensign Shiro Amada would take command of the 08th MS team, which consists of Master Chief Petty Officer Karen Joshua, Chief Petty Officer Terry Sanders Jr., and Petty Officers Mikhail Minerich and Elidor Massis. Alongside these forces, Shiro, Karen, and Terry would be issued 3 RX-79Gs, also known as the Gundam ground type. This mobile suit would be primarily comprised of surplus parts for the RX-78, and did not use a core block system alongside any space use equipment. Under gravity, it easily rivaled the performance of the RX-78. This mobile suit would introduce multiple mobile suits to the ground war with Zeon that were beam weapon capable, on top of having superior performance to the Zeon Zaku. Over in Australia, several ground teams are sent in to reclaim the nation that was so devastated by Operation British. It's here that we find the White Dingo team, headed up by Master Pierce Rare, as they attempt to take back the nation for the Federation. This team would roll out with the Federation's very first mass production mobile suit, the Jim. In the Gobi Desert, Captain Bork Cry is forced to defend the base that he is stationed at from a Zeon incursion led by the Zeon Wolf Gar team. Hopping into a stealth melee specialized RX-78 called the Gundam Pixie. He manages to fight off the team, but sadly loses his friends in the process. Elsewhere, the Federation's guinea pig team, headed up by 2nd Lieutenant Yu Kajima, was given possession of an experimental Gundam ground type known as Blue Destiny Unit 1. This unit possessed the exam system, which would allow the pilot to have enhanced abilities that would rival those of a new type. On top of that, it also possessed the ability to use beam weaponry, alongside any other weaponry that the Gundam ground type would be able to use. The Federation also deployed the Slave Wraith team. This group was made up of court-martialed Federation soldiers repurposed to sniff out traitors to the Federation. This team was also assigned a custom Gundam ground type known as the Slave Wraith, on top of being issued RGM-79G units, the GIM ground type. Across the entire world, a counterattack was being waged, new weapons were being developed, and the Federation was finally ready to begin their counterattack across the entire world. At this point, it is October 4th in the year 0079 of the Universal Century, and it is here that the tides finally turn.